Hello everyone. My name is Ellen Schroeder and I'm Chair of the Trust. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to our very first virtual AGM. I'd like to start by saying thank you on behalf of all of us to all of you for the amazing support you've given us over the past 5 months as we've battled this pandemic. Our staff have worked tirelessly and compassionately to care for our patients, and your incredible support for the NHS and other key workers has made it possible. Thank you. We think our AGM is very important to both let you know about developments and the performance of the Trust over the last year, and also to give you the chance to ask questions. In previous years, we've welcomed hundreds of people to our AGM, and we've been able to include an extensive marketplace where our staff have been able to talk to you and demonstrate many of the services we offer to our patients. This year, although we're unable to hold a face-to-face event, I hope that this format offers you the same opportunity to discuss the topics that matter most to you. We're halfway through our AGM week, during which we're running webinars on topics voted for by the public and our staff. I hope you've been able to see one of the 3 we've had so far, but if you haven't, there are 2 more: tomorrow's, celebrating the Year of the Nurse and the Midwife, and Friday's, on some of the exciting changes we've been able to make in using digital technology. All the webinars will be available from next week on our YouTube site, so do catch up with them if you can. Before we get started properly, let me just show you how to use this system. It's new to me, and I'm sure it will be new to many of you too. You should see slides in the main part of your screen with the live stream of us at the side. If you're on a phone or tablet, you should see a small button top right with circular arrows. If you click that button, it will switch between the slides and the live stream. To ask questions, click on the Q&A tab, then click the plus sign to ask your question. Type in your questions as you think of them. You don't have to wait until the Q&A session at the end. And you remain completely anonymous in this process, so please don't feel inhibited. Ask any question you like. You can also choose to download the slides using the Download tab, and they'll be emailed to you directly. Now to the agenda. First, our Chief Executive, Nick Carver, will highlight some of the key achievements of the Trust over the last year. Martin Armstrong will present our financial figures. Julie Smith, Rachel Corser, Michael Chilvers will then review our performance over the last year. Before we talk about the future, we're then going to share a patient story with you from Chris Goward and his wife, Mary. Nick will give some reflections on the pandemic, and Julie will talk about how we're restarting our services while keeping our patients and our staff safe. We'll then take your questions as a panel, and we have about half an hour set aside to provide answers. If there's any questions that we don't have time to answer, we'll make sure you get an answer by email as soon as possible. But before we begin, I'd like to share my reflections of the past year. I said thank you at the start for your support during the pandemic, and I want to expand on that a bit. I'd like to say a special thank you to our volunteers, our student nurses, midwives, and allied health professionals, and those who came back to work in the Trust after retiring. You all stepped forward to play vital roles, clinical and non-clinical, and we will always be grateful. We already have an incredibly strong volunteer team in the Trust, and that team was complemented by members of the community, including our Help for NHS Heroes volunteer team, who set up a pop-up shop to help distribute food and other donations to our staff. And congratulations to our fantastic butterfly volunteers, who have this year received the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service. Well done for all you do for our patients who are at the end of their lives. Our student nurses, midwives, and allied health professionals who help to care for our patients right at the start of their careers, what a generation they will become. Thank you. And those amazing people who had retired with a wealth of experience, who answered the call to return, and whose wisdom proved invaluable. Thank you. There has been, nationally, fantastic support for the NHS, as demonstrated by the weekly clap for carers. But what has been most heartwarming is the support we've received from our local communities, both in sentiment and also in donations to our staff, our charity and our patients. Donations to our charity have been in excess of £300,000, and once you add in donations in kind, for example food and scrubs, PPE, this figure rises to over £500,000. This has made such an incredible difference, supporting our staff when supermarkets were overrun, protecting them when we needed supplies of PPE, and helping them realise that the community was behind them. Your donations provided a refurbished wellbeing area for our staff to relax and refuel, skincare for those suffering from wearing PPE, and over 200 meals per day for busy staff, including Stevenage Football Club delivering lunches each day and local restaurant deliveries for night shifts. Our staff are hugely grateful, and to pay back into our community, we've launched a food bank collection scheme in each of our hospitals. We hope this goes just some way to express our thanks. And your donations really made a difference to patients as well, providing support for a Staying in Touch service, delivering printed letters and photos in special envelopes to our patients, knitted hearts for patients and families to stay connected, and a large number of digital tablets allowing patients to speak to and see their loved ones. We are also, as a result of your donations, putting in place a support package for our staff for the months and years to come as the psychological impact of the pandemic becomes apparent. I want to share some details of a letter we received from a man whose father sadly died at the Lister in late April, which shows how all of these donations really made a difference. Stuart talks about the exemplary care his father received. He also talks about his relief that those who cared for him had sufficient PPE to keep them safe, and he spoke highly of the volunteer butterfly team who spent time with his father at the end of his life. He talked of the Skype call which was arranged with his father using a donated tablet and the vast difference it made to see his face and hear his voice. That call was the last time they spoke before his father died. I share this example to highlight the way in which our staff and volunteers have an impact beyond looking after the patients they directly care for, but also to highlight the way in which your donations help to make such a difference, not just to Stuart and his father, but to many, many others. Our staff have all made personal sacrifices in discharging their duties, and I'd like to take a moment to recognise the one member of our staff who made the ultimate sacrifice. Dr. Abdi Sedji was from Iran. He came to the Trust last year and was training to become a GP. Abdi made a big impact with his charm and personality. He was devoted to his patients, taking time to understand their problems and worries. And he was a much loved and respected colleague. Abdi contracted COVID-19 in April, and he died 7 weeks later on the 27th of May. We will remember Abdi. He will be much missed. Now I'll pass over to Nick.
Thank you, Ellen. The 1920 year was a very significant year for the Trust, and that was even before the COVID-19 pandemic. A little later on, I'm going to be reflecting on our experiences of the pandemic, and Julie will be looking at the challenges that we have looking ahead. But before then, I'm going to hand over to Martin and the rest of the team who are going to review the last financial year and some of the challenges and successes.
Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. Afternoon. My name's Martin Armstrong. I'm the Trust's Deputy Chief Exec and Director of Finance. So this is actually the 12th AGM that I've done, which is quite a few of these now. But actually, standing here, they're still as nerve-wracking to deliver as ever. And I recall doing the first time ever as a new director of finance. And I was really nervous and I wanted to make a really big impression on there. And I asked my chief exec at the time, I said Claire, because that was her name. I said, Claire, how does this go well? How does this go really well? How do I make a great impression? And she just looked at me and said, you're overthinking this, Martin. It's really simple. You get up there for 5 minutes, you talk about money, and you sit down. And as long as you don't cry or swear during that time, you'll be all right. So against that really high benchmark, we're going to try and get through the next kind of 5 minutes on there. But seriously, my job as finance director is to talk you through the trust performance against its financial targets and duties over the last year. This is my 4th AGM at Eastern North Herts, and I think it's fair to say that my previous visits to the lectern have not been entirely kind of uplifting or happy experiences on there, because in truth, our financial performance has been pretty challenging kind of during that time, and it hasn't been anywhere near what we would have wanted or what we would have expected. However, this year, I think it is a much more uplifting picture that I'm able to present on there for the 1920 financial year, where I think if we just move on to the next slide, you can see this is a really powerful kind of slide. I just like looking at this slide on there. And as you can see, for this year, we've delivered a surplus of just £800,000, just a tad over. And that's obviously a huge movement from the £13.5 million kind of deficit the previous year. And I think if we move on again on there, we can place this into context, because in truth, that's not just progress across 1 year. What you can see, it represents a continuation of a positive trend that we've seen over the last 3 years. A really powerful graph on there. You can see we had an incredibly difficult year as a trust back in 16-17, where we reported a deficit of almost £30 million. So we were spending £30 million more than we were earning through income. But you can see that over the last kind of 3 years, that's steadily and consistently improved to where we are kind of this year, demonstrating a small kind of surplus. Moving on from that, I think it's right that we do reflect, well, actually, why is that? Why has our financial delivery improved? And the truth is there's no one magic silver bullet that kind of explains that. It's about a number of factors kind of coming together consistently that have delivered the position that we're now in. And so what are they? Well, some of it is about us developing a consistent financial strategy and following it year after year. It's also been really important for us as a trust board to balance financial sustainability with quality and performance. All of those things have to remain in balance for us. That's something that's really important, because there's a truism, I think, in the NHS that very often organisations that manage their money well deliver good quality, and vice versa on there. We've also spent a lot of time and effort in really improving the quality of the data and in the information that we use to make our business decisions. And part of that has also been about appropriately capturing and coding the activity that we deliver in the trust on a day-to-day, month-by-month, year-by-year basis. A huge part of the kind of journey as well has also been setting up an expert innovation and improvement function, our PMO on there. And they've made a really valuable contribution working alongside managers, alongside clinicians, to make sure that where we do deliver savings and efficiencies, we do that in a safe and sustainable way. And finally, I think it wouldn't be appropriate if I didn't mention my finance and information team. And I think they have made a really big contribution to our financial journey. They're expert, they're passionate, they're professional, and they're committed to the trust on there. But moving on, it's not just about balancing the books in terms of I&E. We've continued to invest in our asset and infrastructure over the last 12 months. And it's a little bit of a kind of small slide sort of on there, so it might be difficult to pull out some of the detail, but we've spent about £10 million on capital kind of this year. And you can see some of the things that we've spent it on. I think one that I just call out particularly is our spend in terms of IT sort of equipment. We've spent over kind of £3.5 million on IT in there in terms of supporting us on our important digital improvement journey. 1.8 of that alone has just gone on replacing PCs and refreshing that stock and giving our hardworking clinicians and managers the tools that they really need in order to deliver. The next slide is a summary of our statutory performance against our kind of key targets, and I just like to look at this slide in terms of its greenness on there, because it's a long time since it's been like that for Eastern North Herts on there. And you can see against each of the key measures in terms of what we're required to deliver, whether that's against the I&E break-even duty, or whether our balancing and management of cash or capital, or the rate of return that we have to deliver, we've achieved across the board. And that's a fantastic effort for the organisation. But of course, moving on, you don't just have to take my word for this. At the point that we complete our financial statements, we're required to submit them both to the Department of Health, but also to our independently appointed auditors. That's a firm called BDO. And they arrived with us in April, and through 5 weeks, they really pulled apart our kind of financial accounts and tested them, tested the accuracy and the legitimacy of them. And what they concluded back to our audit committee was an unqualified opinion of our accounts, a clean opinion, where they kind of state that our financial statements are a true and fair view of our financial performance. So that's good news. Finally, just to wrap up before I kind of hand on to Julie, I think there's something about the year ahead on there. So we've just looked at our financial performance in 1920 and how that's improved significantly over kind of recent years. But it's also important to kind of reference the impact that COVID has and is likely to have in terms of 2021. And it's turned NHS finances upside down and inside out, as it has for many other aspects of NHS kind of management in there. In the first 4 years of 4 months of this year, we've had an emergency financial framework sort of in place, and that has been specifically designed by the government and our regulators to make sure that our services, our doctors, our nurses, all of our healthcare professionals have the resources at their disposal, whether they're staffing resources or infrastructure or equipment, in order to kind of fight the pandemic on there. I think it's been pretty successful in terms of doing that. We do expect in the second half of the year to move into a different kind of financial arrangement, but that's still being negotiated and discussed by government at the moment. So I think it's a question of kind of watch this space, because I feel it really is about to get interesting there. So hopefully that's been a really helpful canter through kind of financial performance on there. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Julie, our Chief Operating Officer.
Thank you, Martin. Hello, everyone. So I'm Julie Smith, Chief Operating Officer here at the Trust, and I'm going to talk to you about performance. Could I have my first slide, please? So I want to share with you our key performance headlines. But to start with, for those of you who like numbers, there are some really big numbers here that give the scale of the activity going through the hospital in the previous 12 months. I'll pick out a few. 556,000 outpatient attendances, 156 A&E visits, 156,000 A&E visits, over 5,000 births. The numbers should help to give some context to the performance slides that will follow. Next slide, please. So for the next few slides, I want to focus on the key performance targets of the emergency department's 4-hour standard, cancer, and treatments within 18 weeks of referral, sometimes known as RTT. This slide shows the emergency department performance, which is consistently delivering above 80%, demonstrating that 8 out of every 10 patients are treated and discharged or admitted within 4 hours. The team in the emergency department constantly evaluate the performance, striving to improve the service for our patients at all times, finding opportunities to see, treat, and care for our patients in even better ways. Next slide, please. You can see from this chart how the numbers attending the emergency department have increased dramatically over the last 5 years. We have a very busy emergency department. We are often one of the most busy, if not the busiest acute within the East of England. And despite that, the team always prioritise patient care, safety, and experience. Next slide, please. So this slide focuses on 2 specific aspects of the emergency department performance. Firstly, you can see our minors' performance. And with that performance at 99% plus, you can see that the service does really well in support of our patients with minor illness and injuries. The second graph on the right shows the pediatric emergency department performance, which is in the high 90s And even in the depths of winter, in November and December, when there is always a lot of paediatric respiratory patients, the performance remains above 94%, demonstrating great care for our youngest patients. Next slide, please. So now moving on to cancer. There has been a lot of work undertaken by the teams here at the Trust to improve cancer performance, which we absolutely needed to do. Our cancer patients were waiting too long for care. So what did we do? We focused on recovery at tumour site level. And as a result, the Trust cancer performance has improved significantly. The graph contrasts cancer performance from March 2019 on the left to March 2020. And hopefully you can see that improvement. However, we aren't perfect, as demonstrated by the 62-day screening target not being compliant on the bottom of the graph on the right-hand side. This is a really tricky target to achieve because the patient numbers are very low, but we will continue to improve. The cancer standard that is the most meaningful to patients is the 62-day cancer standard. And this means that patients need to be seen, diagnosed and treated within 2 months of being referred from their GP. This target is at 85%, and we achieved 89% in March, which is great for our patients, showing faster diagnosis and early treatment. So we get better patient outcomes, which is our absolute goal. In addition, the standard was also met in April and May 2020. And in addition, the Trust was the only Trust in the East of England to deliver this performance target in May, something of which we are incredibly proud. Next slide, please. This slide powerfully demonstrates the improvement on the 62-day standard and its ranking nationally. In March 2019, we were 127th out of 131 acute trusts. In March 2020, we were 15th. This is down to the great care by all the teams across clinical, nursing, operations, and support staff, and really great for our patients. Next slide, please. Moving on, elective waiting times and treatments within 18 weeks of referral, sometimes known as RTT. This is our biggest challenge currently. Too many of our patients wait too long for treatment. This standard has been most affected by the COVID pandemic. And prior to COVID, this would have been the focus for improvement, starting with the demand and capacity modelling to really understand our patient need and the resources, the people and the space that we have available to respond to that need. As part of Operation Restart, our recovery programme, which I will talk about later, we have begun this review. I have every confidence that by using the same approach we have taken for other service improvement, we can reduce long waits and treatment and waits for treatments and thereby directly improving patient care and outcome. Thank you. Next slide. Lastly, this isn't one of the 3 big performance targets, but it is an incredibly vital service. This is Diagnostics, and it is also a good news story for improvement, demonstrating compliant levels of performance above 99% since May 2019. The only reduction in performance is seen in March 2020 as a result of all routine diagnostics being cancelled due to COVID. Diagnostics are so essential at the start of the pathway, and if delivered in a timely fashion, unlock the path to treatment for our patients. A big thank you to all our diagnostic colleagues for the support role that they deliver so effectively, and to all our teams for everything that they do. Thank you. I'll now hand over to Rachel Corser, our Chief Nurse.
Thank you, Julie. Hello, my name is Rachel and I'm incredibly proud to be the Chief Nurse here at Eastern North Herts. It's an absolute privilege to stand here and share with you all the ongoing improvements we've made as we continue on our quality improvement journey, whilst making significant improvements to the way in which we use our resources and ensure that you, our patients, access all our services in a timely way. We've also continued to make sustained improvements to the quality of care you receive as we put you first and keep you safe whilst in our care. We first presented these 4 quality pillars and the areas we are prioritising at the AGM 2 years ago. These priorities have helped us all focus on what's important to us and what matters most to you, our patients and users of our services. Focusing first on the experience you all have whilst receiving care with us, regardless of where that is fundamental to how we continue to deliver our services. We always put our first. And we showcased some of the incredible initiatives we've taken forward in the last few months at our inaugural AGM Glisser on Monday. There is so much to be proud of, not least the work we are doing with members of the public to help us with the designs of our services, from the way we engage with the Maternity Voices Partnership, who are helping us shape our maternity transformation programme, the children and young people who use our services, and our co-design group who work alongside our clinical teams to challenge our ways of delivering care. We are seeing year-on-year improvements in our national patient experience surveys, and more patients than ever would recommend the care we provide, furthermore validated by our increasing volumes of compliments about the care patients receive. We've continued to strengthen our approach to quality governance and risk, embedding our processes for trust-wide learning so that we have timely and prompt reviews of care to learn from when things go wrong and when care goes well, supporting our staff to report openly and in a timely manner. Our board regularly review the risks we face and the translation of how this impacts on the care provided to you, our patients and service users. We've developed and strengthened the way we keep our patients safe, and Michael will spend longer talking about this shortly. If ever we needed a reminder of the importance of valuing the basics and the fundamentals of care excellence, our response to COVID did that. The work we've done in the last few years to strengthen our approach to infection prevention and control meant the fundamentals of hand hygiene and infection prevention and control standards were placed at the core of all we continue to do every day. Exemplary hand hygiene, good use of personal and protective equipment, and careful placement of patients to protect cross-infection has been central to our ways of working. Replacing equipment, enhancing our cleaning standards and increasing our training provision whilst we strengthen our multidisciplinary approach to infection prevention has without a doubt resulted in fewer hospital-acquired infections this year. More patients than ever receive harm-free care, and our multi-professional approach to this improvement collaborative means we continue to benchmark well with our colleagues nationally and regionally. It would be remiss of me not to mention the celebrations we are continuing throughout this year, the Year of the Nurse and Midwife. Our nursing, midwifery and allied health profession strategy sets out our ambition to become a trust that is recognised for the outstanding contribution we make to patient care and outcomes. I'm incredibly proud that through the work we've done to develop local accreditation of our wards and clinical services, through embedding local and shared decision-making, strengthening our ward and clinical leadership, improving the well-being of our nurses and midwives, and embedding a framework for research and innovation in practice, we have been selected as one of a few trusts nationally to move forward with an international recognition of nursing and midwifery excellence. And I'll be talking more about that tomorrow on our special Year of the Nurse and Midwife Glisser. And now to talk about our Cqc inspection. All of this hard work has not only been recognised by you, but also by our external regulators and our colleagues from the Care Quality Commission. This time last year, we welcomed our inspectors into the Trust during one of the hottest periods we've ever known. Our staff shone, talked with pride and honesty about the work we have done and our plans for continued improvement. You'll see from these slides that the sustained improvements speak for themselves. And we look forward to welcoming our colleagues back into the Trust again in the near future. So in conclusion, before I hand over to Michael, I want to touch on the work that we've been taking forward to develop the East and North Hertfordshire's approach to continuing with our improvement journey. Kevin O'Hart, our Director of Improvement, has been working tirelessly in the last few months to develop our approach to improvement, building on the frameworks in place already and aligning our approach to improvement. It's a really exciting time for us all as we continue to improve the quality of care and the services we provide to you all. Michael.
Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon. My name's Michael. I am the Medical Director for the Trust. And I would like to talk to you on the subject of mortality. So every death is a sad event for family and friends, but an avoidable death is a tragedy for the patient and for their loved ones. Therefore, it is of critical importance that we learn as much as we can from every death that occurs in our hospitals. In order to compare mortality rates, we use two different national systems, HSMR and SHMI. Each looks at mortality figures and then uses complex algorithms to allow comparison between hospitals. A few years ago, our figures for both HSMR and SHMI were high, meaning that more people were dying in our hospitals than was expected. However, I'm now pleased to be able to report that these figures have improved significantly, and we are now, as expected, in fact, we are close to being better than expected. In the graph on the screen at the moment, you can see our position in comparison with all acute trusts in England and Wales. And you can see that we are just outside the best quarter, the best 25% in the country. A few years ago, we were just outside the worst 10. The second graph shows our position compared with our peer trusts. These are hospitals that are a very similar size to us and treat a similar type of patient. And you can see that we are very well positioned there. So how have we done this? Well, we have a network of senior doctors who review the majority of deaths. If there are any areas of concern, then a more in-depth review is undertaken, and any learning is formally fed back to the department and to the wider trust if appropriate. Of course, the best thing that we can do is to avoid a death if at all possible. Therefore, we have set up a deteriorating patient group. This group's remit is to improve our processes for recognising when patients are becoming sicker, and to ensure the early escalation to more senior staff so that treatment can be put in place to prevent further deterioration. There is also the relatively new role of medical examiner. We have 9 consultants who have trained as MEs. Their role will be to liaise with families shortly after the death of a patient, as well as to review the notes and discuss the care with the doctors who looked after the patient. The intention is that this will pick up any concerns that family have at a very early stage and to provide. Nick will shortly talk about his reflections on the COVID pandemic. But first, we would like to share a patient story with you.
I'm Chris Gowd. I'm 75 years old. I've been living here in Hatfield for 15 years. I met Mary 15 years ago. We met through music. We take a great deal of delight in the house and the garden and the family, and we love to go walking.
My name's Mary. My main hobby is playing music, and that's how I met Chris, my husband, who plays the clarinet. We met through playing chamber music together. He has a condition called ITP, which means he's immune to his own platelets, so he bleeds a lot. In the middle of March, he was bleeding a lot, especially in his mouth, and blood blisters everywhere. It was really horrible. And I saw a paper that said coronavirus exacerbated this condition. So we phoned 111, and he was admitted to AMU in Lister Hospital. But he then came home and deteriorated very rapidly.
I was discovered that I had positive virus, so I went in then for the second time on the basis that I had the coronavirus.
I was told to go to a certain door at the hospital. A woman doctor came out and she said, I'm afraid you can't come in and you must self-isolate now for 14 days.
I was expecting it to be the end, I think, really, at that point. And then basically everything went black.
The doctor phoned me when I got back home from taking him to the hospital and said they were going to have to intubate him, ventilate him and sedate him, and arranged for him to phone me, or for us to have a conversation. She didn't say last conversation, but it felt a bit like that.
Are there some last words you'd like to say to Mary? And that's awful. I mean, you can't say no, can you?
So after that last, if you like, phone call, I didn't speak to him again for 17 days.
The reason why Chris deteriorated quite significantly is we know that with COVID-19, you can present with just the mild symptoms, that is a cough, a temperature, and a normal-looking X-ray. But with the way the condition behaves, it sometimes causes an inflammatory response in the lung. And in fact, that's what's happened to Chris, because when he came in, he had a repeat X-ray. And although the X-ray was clear when he was admitted the first time round, the second X-ray showed that he had inflammatory changes in his lungs. And that would explain why his breathing deteriorated quite rapidly.
I couldn't see him and nobody could come and see me. It was really awful because it was a sort of limbo. He wasn't dead, he wasn't alive. I didn't know how he was doing. When the doctor phoned, she said, you can phone to see how he is in the morning and the evening, but we'll only phone you if Chris deteriorates. And that was awful to hear because they had my mobile phone number, so other people have that. And when it rang, it just... For the first week, I think they mostly said he was critical but stable. They seemed to have time for me and told me what I needed to know. I did feel they were giving me emotional support as well as facts. I remember a doctor phoning me when I was walking the dog in the park one day, and I just said no instead of hello because I knew it was the Lister. And it was the first time they'd phoned me since they'd said, we'll only phone you if he deteriorates. But it was a doctor who said, I just need to tell you that if his heart stops, we won't do CPR. It then got better and better. From the second time they reduced the sedation or stopped it, they talked about fitting him with a tracheostomy rather than the intubation for ventilation, and that they would reduce the oxygen he was being given. His own breathing had to provide the oxygen. The good days, I remember, were one day the nurse said he'd drunk some water and smiled. That made me cry, actually.
Once I got accustomed to the fact I was in the Lister Hospital and, you know, I had recovered from this virus and I'd been 17 days unconscious, once I sort of accepted that, we were able to have sort of jokey conversations, which were very motivating. They monitor your oxygen levels in your blood all the time. So they come around and take your oxygen level, and this will be a really critical moment, you know. We can't let you out because your oxygen level's too low. So they measure it and it was too low, and you say, wait. Exercise, whatever, yeah. And that actually pushes it up a bit.
The news that he was being discharged was fantastic. I was really, really happy.
It took me about a week before I was able to look out of the window without bursting into tears. I am quite a driven kind of person. So I kind of set myself targets. The physios came around the day after I got home. So I had targets for walking 5 miles, cycling 10 miles, climbing up the stairs, playing the clarinet, of course, half an hour playing the clarinet with Mary sometimes. I'm 90% back to where I was, and I will be 100% back where I was in a month, Whenever I look out the window and there is this world, I'm just amazed and grateful. What have I done to deserve this? I haven't done anything to deserve this, There are all these people who died and shouldn't have, and there's me who clearly should have died and didn't. So I need to make it count in some way. I need to do good things with it because, it's a present from someone, somewhere.
You just can't thank the staff enough, actually, particularly the CCU staff, because they just did everything for him and they were good to me. They knew what I was going through and they didn't know him. He was just lying there attached to machines, but they did everything for him that they could. And it worked.
There's nothing I can do except just say thank you. What you do is amazing, just absolutely amazing. And I shall remember it always.
Thank you isn't enough. Words aren't enough, money is not enough. Really, it's just, they're incredible. Thank you.
Thank you to Chris and Mary Goward for sharing their experiences with us. In recent months, the Trust has been at the heart of the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As an organisation, we're highly experienced at dealing with the untoward, but this has been very different. In responding to COVID-19, we've been utterly focused upon caring for you. We've been able to react quickly, work closely with our partners, ask much from our people, and to do so in the context of your outstanding support. In the next few minutes, I want to describe the nature of the challenge that we have faced, and then I'll hand over to Julie, who will discuss how we are dealing with the consequences of COVID. I'll start off by outlining the scale of the challenge that we as a trust faced. National modelling suggested that the UK could be facing a level of infection that could overwhelm the National Health Service. Our business intelligence team took this and applied it locally. It suggested that the Trust could very rapidly be experiencing patient demand for 225 general beds and 60 ventilated beds. Subsequent analysis suggested a similar level of demand, but with a delayed peak period. Prior to COVID, we had 13 ventilated beds and 635 acute beds, but clearly 200 additional COVID patients occupying beds could overwhelm us. It's really important that this modelling work is remembered, as decisions made, both locally and indeed nationally, were made in this context, rather than with the subsequent benefits of hindsight. Our numbers, fortunately, did not reach the heights of those modelled. To date, just over 3,300 patients with confirmed or query COVID-19 have been admitted to the Lister, with the peak of those testing positive presenting in early April. Our total occupied ventilated beds peaked at 25 in mid-April and has now returned to normal levels. Tragically, 164 patients have sadly died, with a peak of deaths in early April. On the 30th of January, the NHS declared a level 4 national incident, essentially creating a framework for the national management of the National Health Service. The Trust moved to a major incident footing on the 27th of January. The Trust Board from the very beginning was clear on its responsibilities and met every 2 weeks, virtually. Early on, the board set 2 priorities. Firstly, that we should provide the best possible care, and secondly, that we should provide the best possible support for our staff. The work of the business intelligence team in giving us warning gave us the time to deliver on the board's first priority. On Friday the 13th of March, we started creating a separate COVID and non-COVID hospital, with patients being assessed in the emergency department, which underwent dramatic change, with the minors service being moved to the new QE2 and a new system of front door triage being established. Our critical care unit was expanded from 13 to 46 beds, and the stopping of all routine surgery enabled theatre staff to support critical care and anaesthetic machines to be deployed as ventilators. During this time, our staff showed incredible flexibility. They shifted locations and they took on new roles in the most challenging of circumstances. The sourcing of ventilators was not our only logistical challenge. So was PPE. However, we were able to secure sufficient supplies and at no time ran out. In no small part, this was down to our fantastic infection control team that you can see here, who ensured that we appropriately used PPE in accordance with Public Health England advice. I'm really pleased that we were able to maintain access for the diagnosis and treatment of cancer. In this, we were supported by Ramsay at Pine Hill and by One Hatfield, who provided facilities for our clinical staff to work in. Next slide, please. The discharge of patients to care homes has caused national public concern, and so consequently, I felt it was really important that I address this issue. At the outset, I want to be very clear that we've had a good relationship with Hertfordshire County Council and with the care home sector, and historically, we have few patients waiting for a care home bed. Anticipating the predicted surge in COVID demand, you can see from this slide that we discharged more patients to care homes than normal from mid-February to mid-March. From the 17th of March, all hospitals were required to discharge inpatients who were medically fit to leave. But you can see by then, our discharges to care homes had reduced. On the 16th of April, hospitals were required to test patients being discharged to a care home. Where a test result was awaited, trusts were asked to ensure that they worked with local authorities to isolate patients pending the results. They were not asked to avoid discharge. It can be seen that peak discharges to care homes was on the week commencing the 8th of March, when just 100 tests were available for all patients. And that includes for patients for whom the diagnostic test was absolutely crucial to their clinical treatment. Put simply, testing capacity did not meet the clinical need. Consequently, all patients not tested were treated as if they were COVID positive and were discharged to locations that had indicated that they could appropriately isolate them. It was really important that we delivered on the board's second goal, to ensure that we provided the best possible support to our staff. At peak, over 1,000 of our staff were isolating, sick, or shielding. They were also working under the most immense pressure. And so to ensure support for our people, we created the How Are You Doing team to provide direct support to them. We allocated money from your charitable donations to create rest and relaxation areas across the trust. We established with volunteer support a staff shop for essential supplies, and we worked across the health system to provide psychological and post-trauma support. Crucially, we also risk assessed our staff and redeployed scores of staff to lower risk areas. Over the last few weeks, we have received the most phenomenal support from you, the public. Nearly £600,000 has been given to our charity in cash or in gifts in kind. None of us imagined in February that we would experience 10 weeks of public applause on a Thursday evening, or drive past signs thanking the National Health Service on our way to work. In none of our wildest dreams did we imagine that we would see a Spitfire flying over the new QE2 or the Lister Hospital. Thank you. Your support has made a phenomenal difference. It is clear that we are part of the people's National Health Service, and it makes us more determined than ever to be the best we can for you and to work to maintain your confidence. Since March, every ward and clinical area has changed. Staff have moved location or worked with different teams. Retirees have returned to work and new volunteers have come forward. Our staff have learnt to operate unfamiliar equipment, care for patients with multiple needs, and to support frightened people who were isolated from their loved ones. We have thoroughly redesigned our services. Nothing has been unchanged. The response of our people has been amazing, and they have demonstrated an ability to see complex solutions to difficult challenges, be flexible and change rapidly, and to take personal responsibility, always putting your needs first. As we emerge in the post-COVID world, this will drive an approach that is inclusive and recognises that the solution to the challenges we face are in all of our hands and can only be achieved through teamwork. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a particularly challenging time for those of our workforce from a BAME background. 32% of our workforce are from this background. Whilst we've ensured that our BAME staff are appropriately risk assessed, it is especially commendable that our BAME people have stepped forward despite the increased anxiety they have understandably felt. On Windrush Day, we celebrated 27 nurses from the Philippines who joined this trust 20 years ago and are still working with us. Our goal is to ensure that all of our people, regardless of ethnicity or sexual orientation or disability, should be able to achieve their potential and not be held back by institutional or unconscious bias. In this way, we will best be able to respond to the increasing needs of the communities we serve. I will now hand over to Julie, who will describe how we are responding to those needs.
Thank you, Nick. May I have my first slide, please? So, Operation Restart is our approach to restarting services, and we focused on the same principles that have been our guiding light in the COVID response. And those are, firstly, to give the best care to our patients, and in order to do that, be open to the fact that it might require us to change some things in the hospital. And secondly, to prioritise support for our staff as they continue to work through those changes and respond to the needs of our patients. Next slide, please. Our services didn't all stop, so restarting was not from a standing start. Eastern North Herts was one of the few trusts to continue to provide cancer services, both here at the Lister and through the independent sector as NHS facilities. As we have seen from the performance section, our cancer performance was maintained at compliant levels, demonstrating great outcomes for our patients. As we've heard from Nick, the emergency department went through a tremendous change to provide triage facilities outside of the department, with streaming to COVID and non-COVID departments, prioritising patient care and the ability to isolate patients at all times. Diagnostics continue to support our urgent and cancer patients, and outpatient services were transformed by the use of non-face-to-face digital solutions, accelerating the adoption of new ways of working for patients and staff alike. our maternity services quietly and effectively responded to the changes required, providing COVID-safe hospital and home birth solutions in support of our mums and babies. From this position, we were in a good place to launch our recovery programme. Next slide, please. And it is absolutely right that we start to restart our services for our patients and our communities. We know that there are people out there who need us. At the same time, through the recovery process, we need to remain responsive and adaptable to any changes in COVID and emergency demand, recognising that we may need to change our plans if the emerging position changes. To accommodate our COVID-19 patients in the best way possible, the Trust has embarked on a challenging ward reconfiguration programme so that the arrangement of our core services, such as critical care, respiratory, cardiology and vascular, can be maximised to respond to patient needs. And becoming the vascular hub for the region is also delivering on one of our strategic priorities. Next slide, please. So, where are we at today? A&E attendances are at 80% of pre-COVID levels. Outpatient first attendances are around 70%, with 50% delivered through virtual technology solutions. Routine elective, our surgery operations, and day case are around 50%. And diagnostic levels across CT, MRI, ultrasound between 40 to 65%, showing good progress, but clearly there is more to do. Next slide, please. Recovery provides us with a great opportunity to work as a system, in conjunction with community and social care providers, to deliver joined-up services and to adopt, where possible, digital solutions. There have been great examples of joined-up working already, such as nurses from the Trust reaching out, supporting patients in care homes and the staff that care for them. There are opportunities for flexible workforce, both models and roles across the system in support of integrated patient pathways. We have accessed population health modelling data to understand demand and shape joint services in response. Furthermore, this work will inform winter planning and preparedness, with enhanced resilience delivered through mutual aid and joint working solutions. Next slide, please. The priority now is serving our whole community, whilst dealing with COVID-19 potential surges, future-proofing. In addition, ensuring the hospital is delivering sustainable services with the development of 6- and 7-day working, and working with Health Education England, developing new workforce models and roles in response to emerging patient need. To ensure that we are here for our communities, now and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you, for those great presentations. We're now going to move into our question and answer session. And if you just bear with us for a few seconds, we're just going to get rid of this lectern and then we'll start answering some questions.
Thank you, Ellen. We've got a great number of questions in already and a fantastic number of people who've joined live for the AGM. So thank you to everybody that's tuned in this afternoon. people are already voting for your questions, but it's just a reminder that if there's a hot topic for you, do make sure that you vote for it, because we will generally be taking questions in order that they're voted for. Thank you. So I'll group the questions. If there's a theme, I'll try and theme them, but we'll generally go by the most popular questions. So if we just go for the top three, Nick, and then we can share them out. So the first question is around COVID-19 and is asking, is the hospital ready for a second surge and for flu? The second question is around improving diversity and inclusion at management level, and what are we doing to improve this? And the third question is around the financial progress. So congratulations on the finances, and do we think that financial progress is sustainable?
Okay, can I ask Julie to kick off on the first one? I'll kick off on the second one, although I think Duncan will fill in some gaps, and then Martin on the third one. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for the question. So is the hospital ready for a second surge and flu? So clearly, as part of our Operation Restart, we are ensuring that we are learning all the lessons learned from our response to COVID-19. So we have a work stream called Flat Pack, which essentially means that all the different ways of working that we put in place in support of COVID and non-COVID patients, all the great work that you've heard about around setting up separate wards to support COVID patients, our ability to increase the CCU capacity and the equipment that we need to support it, and the training of our staff and the amazing flexibility and adaptability of our staff. We've captured all that information in this approach that we are calling Flat Pack. So we are able to fold it away and at any stage in response to potential surges, bring that response out again, so that we were able to respond incredibly quickly, but based on the great learning and the benefit of having undertaken this process once already, it's absolutely all that great information is there for us to tap into at any stage. And in terms of flu, as part of our winter management and preparedness, we always have a really strong process of setting up a working programme of planning for winter, and clearly that includes our ability to respond to infections across the organisation, and flu is absolutely one of those infections that really challenges us. So through our recovery programme, we have a flu preparedness programme and our vaccination programme, and we pull all that together. So this winter is absolutely about how we prepare for winter, but how we prepare for a COVID winter.
Thanks, Julie. Just before I start answering the second one and then hand over to Duncan, I should explain that we have other directors in this room who are actually out of sight at the moment and are socially distancing. And so when I hand over to Duncan, he's walking from off stage and he's going to stand in the middle, I think, and answer. So that may happen with some of the questions. That explains why somebody appears out of the dark. I think, first of all, how do we plan to improve diversity and inclusion at management level? I think the first thing is by acknowledging that we and the National Health Service have a problem. So I'm very aware that across the whole of the two regions of Midlands and East, about 15% of our workforce comes from a BME background, and about 6.5% of our senior managers come from a BME background. I think there are some historical reasons for that, not least the fact that actually across the whole of the service, we've failed to manage our talent in a very explicit way. And so if you manage talent according to what's always been, you don't encourage change, you just don't get what you've always had, really. So we do recognise, firstly, that we have a problem within this organisation, and indeed we're part of a health service that increasingly recognises that it has a problem. So I'll hand over now to Duncan, who will tell you about some of the things practically we're doing locally here.
So thank you, Nick. I think there are three important ways of answering this question. The first is the piece that Nick just outlined, which is that without accepting and acknowledging that we have a problem, it's very difficult for us to fundamentally address the problem. So the first part of it is accepting that we have a problem. The second part of it is about creating, as Nick outlined, that upward pressure of talent. And too often in the past, what we've done is focused on building competence and not enough on building confidence. So how do we build and help our staff build the sorts of skills and confidence they need in the system to both apply for jobs and to build their broader skills for leadership and management. And having a systematic approach to talent that is inclusive, that where we bring in all aspects of people's backgrounds, people's orientation, and make sure that we embrace those and celebrate them as part of the process rather than run away or hide from them. So that's the second part. And then the third part is about making sure as an organisation we create opportunities for advancement, that we make sure that as we're looking across the piece, we're selecting for roles, that we make sure that we focus on shortlists for people from BAME backgrounds, for instance. And that will be particularly true as we look in the future at executive and non-executive roles, to make sure that what we do is we create that pressure and the very visible change that creates confidence in people, that we mean it, that we want to do something different. So those things don't happen quickly, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't happen. And it's making sure that we keep on with that agenda, that we talk about that agenda, that we enter and go into some of the uncomfortable conversations that inevitably result from Nick's clear admission that we do need to address this problem. And it's useless to hide from it. We need to face into it. And those are practical things: development programs, talent structures, and shortlists that come together to create a pressure that will shift the culture of very white-dominated management teams in the National Health Service, and particularly for us here at Eastern North Hertfordshire.
Thank you, Duncan. Can we go over to Martin on the finance question, which essentially was, you've done well so far, but can you keep it up?
Yeah, why not? I think we've proved over the last 2 or 3 years that we have incrementally and significantly got better on there. So I don't see any reason why we can't continue that journey kind of going forward. I think there's a bit of reflection about the way that we've done that. So we haven't taken a hacksaw to the organisation, and we haven't just stopped doing things on there. I think there are organisations that have done that, and that's dangerous and that's unsafe. I think we've tried to, across this journey, have a focus on process and systems and how we make changes in a rational and sensible way. And do that alongside kind of improving quality in there. The two are definitely mutually kind of reinforcing. Better quality equals better money, and vice versa on there. So yeah, I don't see any reason, as long as we keep those things kind of in balance and keep a focus on that. And that's very, Rachel mentioned kind of our improvement journey. That Kevin O'Hart, our improvement director, leading his PMO team there, very much kind of focused on new techniques and new areas of improvement on there. So yeah, why not?
Hayley, more questions?
Great, thank you. So the next most popular questions, there's a question about virtual appointments, and are they as good as face-to-face appointments? As we know, we've moved to many virtual appointments. There's a question around how we might be encouraging people who might be anxious attending hospital to come in for essential treatment. And there's a question about the charity donations and how will we be using the charity donations.
Okay, Mike, do you want to kick off on the first one?
Okay, thanks, Nick. So the question was about virtual appointments and are they as good as face-to-face appointments? They're certainly very different from face-to-face appointments. There are advantages and disadvantages to each. I think the key here is to match the type of appointment with the requirements of the patient. So we have various parameters we can use here. So we have face-to-face appointments, the traditional way. You come into hospital, you go to outpatients, you see a doctor or a specialist nurse. They might assess you, they might give you an investigation or treatment. There is telephone consultation, and there's also the option for video consultation. And each patient's requirement will match one of those modalities. And we should also remember that actually traditionally where you might most commonly have seen a consultant or a trainee doctor, now we are pressing forward with plans so that actually you might see a specialist nurse in that area. So the advantages of a virtual appointment are that you don't have to take time away from your normal activities, which might be work. to come into the hospital, to queue to get a car parking space, to pay to get a car parking space, to wait to see in the communal waiting area to see the clinician, which is very time consuming. So what we're doing now in collaboration with Mark and his IT team is to provide the best possible service that's matched to the requirements of the patient. Currently, about 70% of our outpatients consultations are done virtually, and I see no reason why we shouldn't be carrying on with that kind of number of virtual consultations. But if you need a face-to-face consultation, then you will still get one.
Rachel, do you want to pick up the anxiety question?
Yes, thank you. So I think I'll start by saying it's perfectly normal to feel anxious coming into hospital for treatment, and we know people felt like that even before COVID. And as part of our Operation Restart programme, what's been integral to that is about making sure that our patients and our service users have got the confidence that we're going to continue to keep you safe while you're under our care. If you haven't been in the hospital since before COVID, things will feel quite different. We are encouraging and enforcing the use of face masks as you enter each one of our hospital buildings, and you'll be encouraged to signpost to the use of hand gel and hand hygiene stations as you come in, and our staff will work with you on ensuring that you are supported to adhere to those guidelines. So it does feel quite different. It is entirely normal to feel anxious. I urge you to let your clinicians and your clinical teams know if you're feeling anxious, and we can talk to you and reassure you about the measures and the steps that we will take to support you through some of those anxieties. So please do access and use our support services at any opportunity just to help you with that reassurance. Thank you, Nick.
Shall I pick up the question about the charity donations? Firstly, let's reiterate, we are incredibly grateful for the donations that have been given, many of them by people who have chosen to remain anonymous. I would stress that much of that donations, or many of those donations are being used now. Much was given in kind. But we are very clear that those donations were given to enable our people to provide the best possible care. And so there's going to be continuing needs for support. So one of the things that we have been very clear about is that we want our staff to have the very best available support going forward. And for some staff, that will be quite intensive support. But for all staff, it should include things like providing good quality rest areas. And so we'll be working in future months to make sure we can use those resources in that way. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on that.
I don't think so, except to say that we recognise that that COVID isn't over. It may well come back, and that we want to build in the kind of support system for our staff to have to run what is quite a complicated COVID and a non-COVID hospital together. And some of that money may be used now, and some of it may be used into the winter.
Yep. Hayley, any more?
Yep, we've got lots of questions, and again, just a reiteration, do type in your questions as you think of them. There's a fantastic number of people online, so keep them coming through. We've got two questions around COVID and then a question on cancer performance. So there is a question asking how COVID-19 is being paid for, so I'm assuming all the changes, etc. We've got a question asking how did our COVID planning and management compare to our peers in terms of outcomes and deaths, etc. And then the third question is around the cancer performance, which is what does the improvement in cancer performance actually mean for patients, and what difference will they see?
Okay, Martin, first of all.
Yeah, it's tempting to say God only knows in terms of how it's all being paid for. I guess there's two kind of aspects to that. So how are we being reimbursed as a trust for that? So I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, from the end of March, we moved into an emergency financial framework, and that's seen the trust in receipt of a block amount of kind of funding on a monthly basis that's been given to us kind of up front. And then retrospectively, a few weeks later, we're able to apply for a top-up to make sure that any additional expenditure has been fully reimbursed. So the expectation is by the end of this emergency period, this is probably going to be to the end of August or the end of September, have a break-even position. Our costs will match our income, and then beyond that, I think that's still being designed on that. I think there's a wider question in terms of actually how we're going to pay for this as a society. I mean, I think we all kind of watch the news with our kind of mouths open, kind of slightly, when we kind of see scary graphs on the BBC in terms of GDP kind of falling through the floor, the level of unemployment that may come in the weeks and months in there. I think inevitably that's a question for society around taxation, and it may be something that we're all paying for a considerable length of time, and indeed my kids are paying for a while as well.
Shall I pick up the next question about how did our planning and management compare to our peers? The first thing I want to say is I just feel incredibly proud to be Chief Executive of this organisation, to be working with the people in this room, but with the people outside of this room as well. And I think they have done amazingly. So I have a personal view, which is I think they've done incredibly well compared to most other organisations. If you ask me to evidence that, at the moment I think we don't have a lot of comparative evidence. But I do believe that over time there will become more and more comparative evidence. And I do believe that will show a picture that demonstrates that, yes, of course, we have things to learn, like every organisation does, but that actually, I believe, our relative performance will be shown to be good. But I would just commend our people. I think their response to COVID has been incredible, as I think I tried to show in my presentation, right from the early days, around getting good warning around what's coming our way and starting to make preparations. Are there any other?
Thank you. And then there was the final question around cancer performance there as well.
Julie.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So cancer performance. So I think it's really important that I state at the start of answering this that the cancer performance at the Trust has always been a high quality, high standard performance, and our patient outcomes are incredibly high. I think one of the areas that we were struggling with a little bit was to respond to our cancer patients, the timing of our appointments and how we were managing our patients through the cancer patient pathways. So I think when I talk about improvement, it's absolutely about looking at the pathways and the way that we are supporting patients from the point at which they go to their GP and the GP refers them into the hospital. We're doing lots of innovative changes around our services, around looking at one-stop appointments, so that instead of maybe coming for a series of appointments to the hospital, you come for one appointment where you have some diagnostics, you get to see a doctor or a nurse or a support worker, and you get some outcomes that move you on in terms of your care for cancer. So I think there's something about how will it feel different as a patient. It will feel different because it will be streamlined, and that we'll be able to respond to all our patients in a really timely fashion. So it will feel as if previously you maybe felt that there were some slight delays around the care that you were receiving, then that should be significantly reduced. And also access to diagnostics. I'm really pleased to say that we've now got a PET-CT scanner on site at the Lister, and some of our cancer patients needed previously to go down to the Mount Vernon site to receive specialist scanning from PET-CT. That will now be able to be delivered locally through local commissioning of that facility. So that will really speed up patients' turnaround times around getting really good early diagnosis in support of their cancer treatment, so that they can be fast-tracked and receive their treatment really, really quickly. So I think it's about responsiveness, and it will feel as if things are happening quickly and at the right time. So I think those are the impressions that you should feel through the improvement around our cancer performance. And thank you for the question.
Great, thank you. So the next three questions, there's one around are we involved in any COVID-19 research or trials, which is the most popular. The next question is around how is the Trust planning to ensure that people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic and disabled groups have equitable health outcomes going forward. And the third question is around hospital finances, and have they been affected by additional requirements such as PPE, which have not been planned for?
Okay, Mike, do you want to take the first one?
Yes. So historically, as a trust, we've been very much involved in research. We've got a lot of clinicians who are involved in research, both doctors and nurses. We have a Florence Nightingale Foundation Professor of Nursing who's heavily involved in clinical research. And we have been involved in national studies around COVID. So most people are familiar with the news that dexamethasone, a very cheap and widely available drug, improves outcomes in the very sickest patients with COVID, and we enrolled patients in that trial, amongst others. So yes, we have been involved. Our patients have contributed to that knowledge, and our staff have been very involved in contributing to that knowledge.
Rachel, do you want to?
Yes, thank you. So I think there's a couple of responses to the question around how we're planning to ensure that our BAME and disabled groups have got equitable health outcomes. I think first to start off with building on the work that we've already started with our colleagues across the system. So working on understanding what population health data is telling us. So what is our local population need so that we can respond with the services appropriately to meet their needs, their demands. Michael, in his presentation, talked about the work we do on learning from when things go wrong, when people die, and looking at how those improvements in health outcomes can really affect those minorities within our services. We've got really active engagements with a whole diverse group of patients and service users, really engaged with our local learning disabilities group who help us and hold us to account for when we're providing our services and strengthening the way that we're doing that. So there are a number of different ways that we continue to do that, driven by understanding the data and then reflecting the service provision that we need to provide in response to that. Thank you.
Martin?
Yeah, in terms of PPE, I mean, gosh, it's a massive kind of bill. So isn't it? I think by the end of this financial year, PPE will have cost us about £15 billion kind of nationally, and a huge element of that, of course, that's a lot of masks, that's a lot of gloves, that's a lot of gowns on there, and the NHS portion of that is kind of huge on there. PPE, in terms of the way that it's come into the organisation across the crisis, certainly at the very beginning, lots of that was locally sourced, and I think we need to kind of call out some thanks to our kind of procurement staff in terms of the huge effort that they made in terms of ensuring that kit was coming into the organisation and being distributed. Increasingly large volumes of PPE come in via nationally sourced contracts and means of distribution on there. In terms of how it's paid for, yes, there's a big bill that kind of comes with that, but I think as Anne said kind of previously on there, we are being reimbursed for that. But if you think just our cost multiplied by 270 trusts across the country, it's a huge bill.
Great, thank you. So we have one question about how we are planning to recruit, develop and retain our people, because our people are the cornerstone of any organisation, and we have new challenges with COVID and Brexit. And then we have a few questions actually just around visiting, and there's a couple particularly around maternity visiting as well. So just asking about the impact of people not being able to visit. And some other trusts have lifted visiting restrictions and what are our plans around that?
Okay, so shall we start off on the maternity visiting, and then we'll get Duncan back again to pick up the question around the people plan.
Thank you. And I mentioned in my presentation that the work that we do on a regular basis with our Maternity Voice partnership. And this is mums who've recently and less recently given birth and used our services. And it's really important that we connect with them so that they can help us with continuing to improve and provide our services. And visiting has been a really difficult issue, not just for us, but also nationally. And it's important that we do the right thing for our mums and also for their partners who want to be part of a really unique life experience. And we're currently continuing to have the the restrictions to visiting for a number of reasons, not least learning from other organisations that have seen small outbreaks in hospital-acquired COVID infections, and also from listening to what our mums and their partners are telling us. And of course there are some downsides, not least not being able to be part of some of those really unique experiences. But we've heard a lot of mums say that the bond that they build with other mums that they are close to within that care environment, and also their ability to build bonds with their babies. Breastfeeding rates have gone up, and the networks that they've created because of that ability to build close relationships with other peers has certainly had a positive impact. More broadly, we know that there are some further work that we need to do around how we support our mums psychologically, postnatally, and again, that's not unique to this period. That's something that is nationally growing, and really important that we do that with our partners as we go forward. For the rest of the hospital, we continue with visiting restrictions. We are keen that we support you to come and visit and provide care when we've got our more vulnerable patients, so those with learning disabilities and those at the end of their life. We are continuing to review that, not only locally, but with our other providers who are close by, so that we are doing something collectively. And we will continue to engage with you and each other, learn from what's happening in other hospitals as those visiting restrictions are lifted, and ensure that we've got the right processes and support infrastructure in place as we continue to review those processes. But thank you. Nick, is it you or Duncan?
So completely agree that people are the cornerstone of any organisation. The challenges of COVID and Brexit are important. I think, but it's also equally important to say that they highlight many of the existing challenges that we already had around the supply of healthcare professionals and the challenges of making the most of our workforce. So at the end of last year, the board signed up to a new people strategy, and that people strategy focuses our time and attention on making sure that we work, grow, thrive and care together. What that essentially means is that we are looking much more closely at how we work, so developing new models of care, thinking about how we can make the most of the workforce that we do have, making sure that we grow our workforce, so we offer development opportunities into those new models of care as well as the traditional ones, and thinking about our investment balance between recruiting new staff and developing our existing staff. But it also invites us to think really carefully about how we make the most of the staff that we do have, because they are here, they are committed. What they've done through COVID demonstrates just how amazing the people are that we employ. And an enormous amount of that is about making sure that we use our new improvement methodologies to think about how we listen to what people really need to make their jobs easier and give them the things that they need to help them make their jobs easier wherever that's possible to do. One thing I would add to that is that what Brexit does obviously is challenges some of the international supply that we have had, but the NHS in general is working very closely with government to understand how we can use the new systems to bring staff in. There will be a significant advantage for healthcare professionals coming into the sorts of jobs that we have, although some of the social care challenges will still be there. I think what it does is it focuses our minds on what we have to do to make the most of the people we have, which is something we were starting to do anyway, but it brings it into greater relief. It's still critical.
Great, thank you. We've got a question about Brexit and what preparations is the Trust taking to prepare for a no-deal Brexit scenario for 2021 and beyond. We've got a question about integration into local healthcare systems and how has the pandemic affected the move towards greater integration and collaboration? Have we slowed? Have we sped up? And there's a question around how have we managed the money while at the same time improving mortality rates? And I will just add, we've only got a few minutes left, just 1 or 2 minutes. So if you have any burning questions, do vote them up and we'll ask them in the next session.
So I'm going to suggest we take the Brexit question last and ask Sarah, who's off-stream, socially isolated, come in and pick that one up. But perhaps, Martin, you could pick up managing the money and the mortality rates, or you and Mike may want to do a 1-2 between you, actually, and perhaps Julie in terms of collaboration.
I mean, in terms of managing the money and the mortality, I mean, I don't think it's either or. I don't think you do one at the exclusion of the other. I think you have to do them both together, and that's how you do it safely, and that's how you do it well. And I think that's been our philosophy over the last 2 or 3 years, and I think it'll be our philosophy going forward. I don't know if you want to add anything, Mike.
Yes, thanks, Martin. So I'd use my favourite analogy of the three-legged stool of finance, operational performance, and quality and safety. And I think, as Martin said in his presentation, actually, organisations that are good at one or two of those are generally good at the third one as well. So it's no good having fantastic operational performance if your quality and safety is poor and you have no money to pay for your services. So we're doing all of them, hopefully not to the detriment of each of the other ones.
Thank you. So in terms of collaboration and developing greater integration, we have absolutely seen greater integration. So I think we've had a single common purpose across the healthcare system, and we have worked incredibly collaboratively with colleagues across social care and across community services, and clearly in the early days when we need to support our patients so that we could discharge patients and continue to care for them in the community, that was absolutely in place, and we reached out to our system and community care colleagues and they absolutely responded. Rachel led an initiative whereby the nurses from the Trust went out and supported patients in their care homes. So I would say it's absolutely accelerated the desire to work together, and the results have actually played out that we have worked much more effectively together, and it puts us in a really good platform for going forward. I'll hold it there. Thank you.
Okay. And Sarah, COVID has caused us to want to talk about Brexit again.
Okay, hello. Just very quickly on Brexit, the hospital went through very robust planning last year in expectation of a potential no-deal exit last year. And I think also our experience of the COVID pandemic has shown that we are very adept at emergency resilience and the way that we ensure the continuity of our services. So we will ensure that we both refresh our previous Brexit planning, but also incorporate any learning from the last year, including what we've learned through the pandemic.
So I'm getting signs that say our time is up. I am conscious there's probably some questions there that we haven't answered. We've run out of time. If you want to send us an email me directly. We'll try and answer your questions offline. There's another sign being held up to remind you to please give feedback. There's an opportunity for you to give feedback on how the process has worked for you. You can see the feedback box there. And if you could rate the session as well. You wouldn't believe how important the rating of the session is to some of my colleagues around the table, around the room here. So I think, Ellen, that's it, isn't it?
I think so, except to say, I mean, we'd like the feedback partly because it is our first virtual AGM, and it would be very interesting to us to how it went down. And I think there were so many questions there. We really have an obligation to get back to people, so we will try hard to do that.
Absolutely.
And thank you very much for everybody for coming, and it's been wonderful to know that you're all out there and watching, even if we can't see you.